limits versus the county limits, and talk about a whole host of other issues relating to infrastructure. This is preventing those discussions from happening. So the sooner we can remove this obstacle, which really is about fiscalization of land use, get this off the table, the sooner we can move on to some other more important discussions we need to have about how we're going to work together in providing services to the citizens. I would tell you that based on some preliminary numbers I've seen based on old data, and what I think is happening in the current economic climate, I don't think we're talking about a whole lot of money here. I would be very much surprised if in the course of next year, which would be the first year of sales tax sharing of 2009, if there's $100,000 to share in a new growth of sales tax, I would be surprised. So I don't think you're talking about a huge sum of money here at the present point in time. At some future point, there is the ability for significant dollars to get generated as the valley develops, but not in today's current economic times. This is not something that's going to generate huge sums of money that either the city gives up or the county gives up. It's more important to create a positive working relation so we don't fight with each other over where development is going to occur.
And let me caution you about one other. He mentioned one good point, which is that the dollar volume is actually not that high when we looked at it. There is one other. If you are really going to consider this as the preliminary step in a permanent pre-annexation agreement, then I would like some direction from board on that today, because it would change a little bit about how we're approaching this. And when I say it would change that, we would look at creating some sort of a stepping mechanism on the percentage split between the city and county, so that as annexation occurs, it would make more sense. And I want you to keep that in mind as you think through today what are some of the issues that you see.
And before I go to Supervisor Pinches and then Supervisor Smith, to add on to what Tom said, to take away the fiscalization acrimonious atmosphere, now might be the best time to be coming up with this agreement while there's really not huge amounts of development or huge amounts of dollars being proposed, and we'd actually be ahead of the situation instead of history shows Mendocino County following the wagging tail instead of being ahead of it. So it might be a preemptive type of a situation. Supervisor Pinchot.
Well, I'm going to disagree with the thought that this is mostly about the fiscalization of land use, and I'll explain why. First of all, I believe the county has I'm assuming that this tax sharing agreement be basically whatever the revenues are to be split between the city and the county. The county of Mendocino has the ability, when it comes to services, to extend those county general fund dollars into a lot greater. For instance, in our Health and Human Services Agency, probably for every county general fund dollar we put into it, we can recover about $7 to $10 in federal and state money, where the state don't really have that ability, or the city of Ukiah doesn't have that ability. So the dollars that we give up, the tax dollars that we give up, which are general fund dollars, I believe the county has a way to expand those dollars into probably 7 to 10 times more in services, where if we give up those dollars, we would be limited. So, and that's real important to me, coming from a rural area. I've said many times, show me where a tax sharing agreement between County Mendocino and the City of Ukiah will benefit the folks in Covelo, and I'll consider it. And until I see that happening, I've got some real problems. But, think about that. We always talk about in our Health and Human Services Agency and those programs we have about how trying to fund those programs or take whatever general fund dollars we can, because there's a tremendous benefit in leveraging those local tax dollars into state and federal dollars, which brings bigger returns in how we take care of our people, whether it's mental health services, public health, environment, all those issues. So if we took those dollars and give it half of them to the city, that leverage would be gone. We wouldn't have that. So I think a county tax dollar goes a long ways further than a city tax dollar in that regard. And that's, so it's more about a land use issue. It's more about How do we take a limited amount of tax dollars and get the most for our money for our people?
Thank you. Supervisor Smith.
Thank you. I think this has been a good sort of focus for the board in terms of looking at what the broad parameters are. So I appreciate your PowerPoint and just sort of taking us through some of the very core concepts about taxation. So my questions are on page 2. It begins, if the city and county continue to meet on this topic of sales and use tax revenue sharing, then there's confidence that a preliminary consensus could be reached on, and then there's a whole long host of things. One thing I'd like to spend a little time on, because it seems to be one of the core issues that's been brought forward if we're going to go forward, is this geographic area. So I'd like to hear more from staff or from the board members on the committee on what has comprised the geographic area discussion points to date. What has been talked about with that, because that's one of the things you want us to weigh in on. So I'd like to know what the discussions have been.
Would you like me to address that, or would you like the board member to address that?
Either or both.
Go ahead.
I think that initially there had been some discussion of using a zip code, and